Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Okay, let's unpack this. Here's something really striking that came out of the coronavirus disease of 2019 pandemic data. While men and women got diagnosed at pretty similar rates, men were like 3 times more likely to need intensive care.
3 times. That's a huge difference.
Exactly. Same virus, but such different outcomes in terms of severity. So the big question is, what's the biology behind that?
Right.
And this new study from Umeå University in Sweden, well, it might just have found a crucial piece of that puzzle.
Yeah, it looks promising. This research, it was published in the European Journal of Immunology, and it really tried to get at the biological reasons why men seem to have a harder time with severe coronavirus disease of 2019.
So for this deep dive, we're going to look closely at that scientific paper, right? And also some info from a health news piece about it.
Exactly. The goal is to really understand the key findings and what they could mean for treating severe cases down the line.
Okay, let's get right into the study itself then.
Right.
What were the researchers actually trying to achieve? What was the main point?
Well, the core aim was to figure out the specific biological mechanisms, the how and why, behind these sex differences in severity. People knew men were more susceptible generally, but the detailed biological reasons, those weren't really clear. This study wanted to dig into that.
And how did they go about it? What was their sort of method?
They set up what's called a translational research project, basically bridging the gap between lab science and actual medical use.
Okay.
It involved different research groups at Umeå University working together, plus the university hospitals there and in Örebro. They took blood samples from over 200 Swedish patients. These were all confirmed severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2 infections using polymerase chain reaction tests.
And importantly, they made sure to include women, too.
Yes, 86 of the participants were women, which is crucial for comparison. They also collected plasma samples from 77 healthy people as a control group.
Right, a baseline. So they've got all these samples. What exactly were they measuring or looking for?
They focused on a few key things related to the immune response. One doctoral student, Remigius Groening, mapped out a whole profile of cytokines.
Cytokines, those are the immune system's messengers. Right?
Exactly, signaling molecules. Then another student, Emily Backman, quantified molecules that show neutrophil activation.
Neutrophils, white blood cells, the first responders.
Precisely, they're key players. And specifically, they measured levels of something called myeloperoxidase, deoxyribonucleic acid complexes in the plasma, the liquid part of the blood. These complexes are a big clue that something called neutrophil extracellular traps are forming.
Neutrophil extracellular traps.
Oh.
Okay, that sounds complex. What are those exactly?
Think of it like this. A neutrophil, that white blood cell, essentially throws out a sticky net made of its own deoxyribonucleic acid.
A net?
Yeah, and it's studded with proteins that can trap and kill pathogens, like viruses or bacteria. So nets for short.
Got it. So they measured signs of these nets. What else?
They also did an interesting experiment where they took neutrophils from healthy people and mixed them with plasma from the coronavirus disease of 2019 patients, just to see if the patient plasma itself could trigger these nets to form.
Ah, okay. Checking the direct effect.
Right. And to understand how it was happening, they used inhibitor substances that block specific things, that blocked reactive oxygen species, which are chemically reactive molecules, and also specific signaling pathways inside the cells involving actin-sync molecules.
Actin-sync signaling pathways, so trying to pinpoint the mechanism.
Exactly. And finally, they measured levels of one specific cytokine, interleukin-18, and compared the levels between men and women who had severe disease. They even tested whether the virus's spike protein, the part that helps it enter cells, could directly cause these nets to form.
Wow, okay. That's a really thorough approach, looking at it from multiple angles. So after all that detailed work, what were the main takeaways? What did they find?
Several really key things came out. First, patients with severe coronavirus disease of 2019 definitely had higher levels of those cytokines that call in and activate neutrophils. And they also had higher levels of the markers showing neutrophils were activated compared to the healthy group. No huge surprise there, maybe.
Right, you'd expect more immune activity with a severe infection.
Exactly. But here's the crucial part regarding the sex difference. The increase in that inflammatory cytokine, interleukin-18, and the neutrophil activation, that was different between men and women.
How so?
Men who had severe coronavirus disease of 2019 showed significantly higher average levels of interleukin-18 and these neutrophil activation markers in their blood plasma compared to women who also had severe disease.
Okay, so a clear biological difference showing up right there in those specific immune markers between severely ill men and women. What else?
They also confirmed that the plasma from the patients could trigger healthy neutrophils to release those nets. And interestingly, the more severe the patient's illness was, the stronger this net triggering effect seemed to be.
So disease severity correlates with this net formation potential.
Seems like it. They also figured out that this net formation, when triggered by the patient plasma, involved those reactive oxygen species and the AGDIT and SYNC signaling pathways they were investigating.
Uh-huh.
And maybe the most striking finding for the sex difference, levels of those myeloperoxidase deoxyribonucleic acid complexes, the indicator for NETs, were significantly higher in the plasma of men with severe disease throughout their illness.
Throughout the illness.
Yes. But this big increase wasn't seen in women with severe disease, nor in patients, male or female, who had only mild or moderate disease.
Wow. Okay, that's a pretty specific link, high net markers, specifically in men with severe illness.
It is. And one last piece. Adding the severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2 spike protein directly boosted net formation. And they could block that boost by inhibiting SYNC, which suggests that certain immune receptors, called FC receptors, are probably involved in that process.
Okay, so the spike protein itself plays a role, likely through these FC receptors and the SYNC pathway, leading to more NETs, especially evident in severely ill men. This sounds like it could really explain a lot.
It definitely points in a strong direction, that finding the elevated interleukin-18 and the much higher neutrophil activation and net formation predominantly in men with severe disease is pretty significant.
And how does that connect to the worse outcomes, like needing intensive care?
Well, we know severe coronavirus disease of 2019 often involves this massive, exaggerated inflammatory response, particularly damaging the lungs. If you have too many neutrophils rushing in and getting hyperactivated, releasing all these nets and inflammatory substances, they can actually start causing significant damage to the lung tissue itself.
So the immune response, trying to help, goes overboard and causes harm.
Exactly. It's like friendly fire, in a way. And this can contribute to respiratory failure and those really severe, sometimes fatal outcomes.
Makes sense. So this research fits with other work trying to calm down that neutrophil response, right?
Absolutely. There's ongoing research looking at treatments specifically designed to suppress neutrophil activation to try and reduce that lung damage in severe coronavirus disease of 2019. This study really underscores why considering sex differences is so vital when developing and applying those kinds of treatments. What works best might differ.
And it also highlights neutrophils in viral infections, not just bacterial ones.
Yes, that's a good point. Neutrophils are often thought of primarily in the context of fighting bacteria, but this work really emphasizes their important and potentially damaging role in severe viral infections too. It suggests that maybe interleukin-18 levels or these net markers could be used clinically, perhaps as indicators of severity or even as direct targets for new therapies, especially tailored based on sex.
So potential for better diagnostics and treatments down the road. Now, you mentioned the sample size earlier. Were there other limitations noted?
Yeah, the main one the researchers pointed out was the number of samples from severely ill patients. While it was over 200 total patients, breaking it down by severity and sex means the groups for some analyses aren't huge.
Understandable.
So they definitely plan to conduct follow-up studies with larger patient groups to really verify these findings and strengthen the conclusions. That's standard practice in science, of course.
Always good to replicate and confirm. What did the actual researchers, the experts involved, say about the significance of their findings?
Well, Johan Normark, he's an infectious disease physician and one of the lead authors. He really stressed that point about the intensive care numbers. He said, look, overall case numbers were similar, but men needing intensive care 3 times more often. That really highlights why we need to understand the sex differences in severe disease. And he feels this study contributes significantly to that.
Okay.
And Professor Konstantin Urban, another key researcher, he pinpointed the sex-dependent increase in interleukin-18 and neutrophil activation as the most interesting finding for him.
Right, that core difference.
Yes. And he emphasized how crucial it is now to map out these neutrophil response differences between men and women with severe disease very precisely. He thinks getting that detailed picture is essential if we want to develop smarter treatment strategies that target neutrophil activation effectively.
So refining the understanding to refine the treatment.
Exactly. Professor Irvin also made the broader point that this study just shows again how incredibly complex the immune system's response to viruses is, and how all these intricate interactions can really shape how sick someone gets.
It's definitely not simple, so this research feels like more than just identifying a difference. It could genuinely pave the way for more personalized medicine in infectious diseases.
I think that's the hope, and it really prompts us to think, doesn't it? How could really grasping these biological sex differences lead to better, more tailored treatments, not just for this virus, but maybe for other illnesses too?
Yeah, it makes you wonder what other conditions might have similar underlying sex-based differences in immune response or severity that we just haven't fully explored yet.
Definitely. It highlights the importance of, keeping an eye on research in immunology and infectious diseases. Our understanding is constantly evolving.
Absolutely. Well, this deep dive has certainly illuminated a potential key mechanism involving that interleukin-18 and neutrophil activation, particularly the nets, that could help explain why men faced a higher risk of severe coronavirus disease of 2019. And that knowledge, as you said, could really shift how we approach treatments in the future. Thanks so much for joining us on this exploration into the science. And maybe a final thought for everyone listening. If our immune systems can react so differently based on sex in this context, what other, perhaps subtle but critical biological variations might we be missing in how we understand and treat diseases overall?
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.